This is Humans.
Humans. I'm Hank Green. As I record this, it is July 31st in Montana. It's hot, it's dry, substantial portions of it are on fire. And in any of the last 8 years, Sam Forstag would be out there in those fires, or getting ready to be. Sam is, or was, a smoke jumper, a person who jumps out of airplanes to fight wildfires, which is just a absolutely insane description for a job, especially when you realize that they don't have hoses out there. But Sam is not prepping for the fire season right now. He's prepping for something very different and much worse, running for Congress. Sam is running for Congress in my district, MT1. And yes, Montana. And yes, Sam is a Democrat, or at least he's running as a Democrat. Actually, I should ask him about that. I first saw him giving remarks before a Bernie Sanders rally, and I was like, I wonder if that guy would ever run for something. Of course, it appears they were way ahead of me. In addition to being a smoke jumper, Sam is a union leader, and he's championed for wildland firefighters, a surprisingly low-paying job. But I will say, they look extremely cool, so there's that at least. I want to talk to Sam about Montana, our Montana, but also everybody else's, how there could possibly be a district in deep red Montana that's actually competitive, especially when there's only two of them, how he imagines his electorate, and how people figure out how to be in Congress at all. Sam Forstag, are you a Democrat?
Hank, that's a good question. I was raised Catholic, and you got to go through a confirmation process on the back end of that. So I always tell people I'm Catholic on paper. And for better or worse, a lot of us are stuck in this two-party system where you got to put yourself into a category. So I'm running as a Democrat, Montana's first, because I think we need to rebuild the kind of Democratic Party we used to have.
Because that's the thing. The party, it turns out, is just a group of people, and what it is determined by those people. And I think that people have a lot of frustrations with both parties right now. But I think that Democrats have a lot of frustrations with the Democratic Party right now.
Oh, yeah. I tell people I'm just a hair less frustrated with the Democratic Party nationally than the Republican Party.
Wow.
I mean, we hold these truths to be self-evident. The Democrats messed up, and that's part of how we got here.
Yeah. There were two things that happened.
Yes.
Somebody won, somebody lost. We're going to get more into that. I do want to talk about smoke jumping, though. So this is a thing we live in Western Montana. Smoke jumpers are a thing. We have the Smoke Jumper Museum here in Missoula. They're like a cultural institution here. Why do people go into that line of work, do you think?
Well, a lot of people go into it because it's a way to make some money and pay your bills. I mean, I got into fire after I finished college at the university because even though I was working 2 to 3 jobs at a time, the entire time I was going to class, I still graduated with debt. So I thought I'd just do a year or two and pay off my debts. And I learned you could get paid to jump out of airplanes into our public lands and parachute into a wildfire. And I thought I had to stick around at least long enough to do that. And 8 years later, here I am.
How are your knees and ankles?
I got pretty lucky with my knees. I've injured them a couple times, but my knees are in their 40s, even if I'm in my 30s.
What is it feeling like to watch this fire season from the sidelines?
I was just texting a friend earlier today, actually, telling them I hope that they're safe out there because there have already been a few fatalities in the fire line just this season, terribly. But also telling them I wish I was in their boots because it can be exhausting working 2 or 3 times at a stretch, 16-hour days. It's a whole different kind of exhaustion. While having even fewer days off and doing everything I possibly can to meet as many people face-to-face as possible, because this is a 147,000 square mile district, and there are a lot of people who we're going to have to talk to directly if we're going to cut through the millions of dollars of advertising they're going to be pouring in against us. Yeah.
I mean, speaking of that risk, have you lost friends?
Yeah, I have. Yeah. Prior to jumping, I worked for a few years on a hand crew about an hour and a half northeast of Missoula over in Condon on the Great Northern, and the year I started jumping, when I rookied in 2022, a good friend who had worked for me for a couple of years, our best Sawyer, he ended up over on Craig Hotshots and got hit by a tree. And that guy died in his boots, making probably $15 an hour, probably without health insurance because he is a temporary employee like most firefighters were. And that's a travesty. And that's a function of having people in power who don't know what it's like on the ground doing these critical jobs.
So how did you then transfer into, did that union already exist and you transferred into leadership?
Yep. The union's the National Federation of Federal Employees.
Big one.
Actually, it just so happens we're sitting right in the middle of the Lolo National Forest here in Missoula. It's the first unionized forest in the United States that organized back in 1917.
Wow, that's Montana for you.
Yeah, great story coming full circle. I mean, we're in Montana, right? The Gibraltar of unionism is in this district, Butte. But there was one non-union national forest left in the state of Montana. As of 2 years ago, is the Custer Gallatin that stretches over across Bozeman into eastern Montana. And when the Doge cut started, when we had 360 Montanans in the Forest Service fired in one day with no cause and no notice, suddenly a lot of folks started to see what the use of a contract might be. And we didn't just take it. We went and organized, and we talked to a lot of people across the Custer Gallatin. We talked about the fact that there are people at the highest levels of power, one of whom is the richest man in the world, who are taking it as their job to try to make us feel alone and powerless, and we're not. And that's what a union's for, and they organized the Custer Gallatin. They are now under contract. They have those protections. That's how we fight back.
Are you still involved in that? Do you sort of like know what the situations are on the ground?
Yeah, I stepped down as vice president because this is a wake to sleep job, and there's plenty of work to be doing in our local right now, Local 60. I'm still a dues paying member, and I'm hoping to see some of my members down in the Bitterroot in about a week and a half for a town hall.
How has union bargaining been? Are you guys into a new CBA now? Or is that how it works with government? I don't even know.
Well, luckily, not just luckily, as the result of a lot of hard work, our contract runs through the end of this administration.
Oh, okay.
And there have been, you probably heard there's an executive order last year stripping collective bargaining rights from 1 million federal employees in one fell swoop. That fortunately did not apply to the Forest Service, but it did apply to a lot of firefighters in the BLM, which includes a couple of smokejumper bases.
Should we talk about how American lands are managed? I think that we should.
Now you're talking my love language, yeah.
It's not on my list of questions, but now that you've said BLM, it feels necessary.
Yeah.
So America has a lot of land. Some of that land is private because people own it. I own the land beneath my house, and a lot of big companies own like big swaths of land, whether it's farms or it's timberland. But the U.S. government also owns a lot of land. And in that way, we all own it together, and we, as a government, try and figure out what to do with that land.
Mm-hmm.
How's that divided up?
Well, yeah, we have well over 300 million acres of public lands that we all own, regardless of what station you were born into, how much money you got. We all have the heritage of public lands that we have been fortunate enough to inherit, and that came from a lot of people fighting to make sure that we had those. So the Forest Service manages, generally speaking, land that has timber on it. The BLM, generally speaking, and this is not categorical, they tend to manage rangeland. There's more BLM land in eastern Montana where it's rolling prairie. Well, so we end up having to manage those things for risks like wildfire, risks that are increasing with climate change and with fuel loading, with the fact that I'd offer excessively suppressed wildfires for the last 100 years. And now we're playing catch up on a whole lot of it. And the risks that increase when we have massive cuts to our public lands agencies. And now we have fewer people to manage those things.
You say fuel loading. Is that the thing where there's a lot of unmanaged lands that's just had a lot of fire fuel buildup?
Yeah, fuel loading would be, as a firefighter or wildland firefighter, timber, shrubs, brush, that is fuel for fire.
Right.
Fire start requires spark and fuel. So that fuel loading is what happens when we have types of trees, for example, like lodgepole pine that might naturally burn on a 15 or 20-year cycle. Some trees cannot reproduce if they aren't exposed to fire. And if you suppress fire for too long and you got a stand that hasn't burned in 60 years, well, suddenly you got stands so thick it's hard to walk through them.
You're not going out there with hoses. What are wildland firefighters actually doing out there in the woods?
The way that we fight fires is actually pretty rudimentary, and it hasn't changed a lot. We, generally speaking, we got a Pulaski. It is a tool you might see that's got an axe on one end and an adze on the other, the digging end and the cutting end, and you dig a trench. You just dig a ditch in the woods in the path of that fire, and then you run a chainsaw and cut out any fuel, cut out any bushes, shrubs, trees in the path of that thing. So when the fire comes up to your fire line, that trench, that saw line that you've cut, it has nothing else to burn, and hopefully that fire doesn't burn over your line.
So you're just out there digging for hours, digging and cutting.
Absolutely. I'll tell you, I studied philosophy in college. That's what you get. You end up digging ditches in the woods. But it is the most incredible job I have ever had, and I miss it so much.
Oh, and fascinating. I mean, I guess it'll keep you in shape if you can do it.
Yeah. It's often on steep, rugged terrain. Fire burns a lot quicker if it can burn uphill on topography. Yeah, it does. And our wildland firefighters are asked to maintain a pretty high level of physical fitness. Smoke jumpers, sometimes an even higher one. Well, always an even higher one. And, oftentimes they're undercompensated for that work that has a lot of risk that comes with it.
Yeah, yeah. What's the space rate now?
It's improved quite a bit. And I will tell you a frustrating thing is that the first meaningful pay raise we got in my 8 years of Wild and Fire came during this Republican administration.
Mm.
It came during Mike Johnson's continuing resolution. Prior to that, we were making $19 an hour, or I was at least, as a seventh year firefighter, eighth year firefighter jumping out of airplanes for the federal government. In a community where you'd be lucky to find a house for less than $500,000, I think that speaks to a lot of the kind of disillusionment that you see in places like this.
Yeah. Well, you've brought up housing now, which is my pet peeve.
You don't like housing, Hank?
I hate it. Get rid of all of it.
Yeah.
Montana, depending on how you count, now has the biggest gap between average income and home price. The localities might have us beat, but in terms of state by state, how do you think we got there?
We got here through decades of inaction and then through the fact that people discovered Montana in the last 5-10 years. I'd say it's two things. It is systematic underinvestment in the places that we used to build affordable housing with. It is lack of much needed reforms to make sure you can build the housing where you need it, although there's been a little bit of progress on that front. And then it is the fact that we are dealing with a massive influx of people, like a lot of places in the West. It's not unique to Montana. It is just on overdrive where you can go to Bozeman and go to a mobile home park on the edge of town like I've been doing and talk to somebody whose lot rent has doubled in the last 2 years. And then 20 miles, 30 miles away, you got the Yellowstone Club where you got to be a multimillionaire just to be eligible.
Just to get in the door.
Yeah.
So you mentioned two things. I want to get into both of them. So there's the underinvestment. Why? You'd think, if you can build a house and sell it, people build a house and sell them. That's how capitalism works. But there's something standing in the way, whether that's, I don't know. Do we have a good grasp on what's going on there in Montana?
Yeah, I'll tell you, if you go to a place like Bozeman or the Flathead Valley or here in Missoula County even, it's just a matter of where the profit margins are. Profit margins are thin in construction. They're even thinner when lumber prices go up, and that's a whole other question that we could get to later. But you make a lot more money going out into the county and building a 5-bedroom house on 2 acres and selling that than you do in the middle of town building dense infill housing, building condos or apartment complexes where a lot of people could live in what would actually be an environmentally more friendly way to construct. And so that is precisely where subsidy comes into the equation, and that's where we've underinvested as a government over decades and under both parties' leadership.
Yeah, because it's often also much more complex to build in fill situations in downtowns, but that's where the homes really need to be. Because, living near downtown Missoula, that's a sweet gig if you can get that.
Yes,
because it's a great downtown.
Yes.
So obviously, a lot of people want to do it, which drives up those home prices as well.
And we got programs that we used to invest in as a country to solve these problems. I mean, I've been talking about history a lot in the course of this campaign. We've had housing crises in this country before. I mean, look at World War II. We had an entire generation of people coming back stateside needing homes and wanting to build families. And you know what we did? We invested billions in 1950s dollars on a bipartisan basis. And the programs we have today that we could be investing in, it's things like the Community Development Block Grant. That is a federal program that we invested in to build affordable housing in places where we need it. The funding for that program has not meaningfully increased in 20 or 30 years. And the problem sure has.
Yeah. What a wild situation we are in. And then the other piece of the equation is making it easy, ideally, making it easier. This can be bipartisan. We've seen states where this has been bipartisan. Montana hasn't completely fallen flat on this, actually.
No, they call it the Montana Miracle. That oversells it.
I'm like, Montana hasn't completely fallen flat. The newspapers are like, I found 2 words with the same letter.
They love alliteration. Yeah. But no, it's zoning reform. And I'll tell you, when it comes to reforming zoning to making sure that you can build in the city center, that parking requirements aren't the thing standing in the way, setbacks, et cetera, it is not a partisan problem. I mean, oftentimes it's Democrats standing in the way of those issues, and they're standing in the way of policy changes that we need to make sure that the next generation of people can afford to live in this place.
Yeah. And a lot of that is, I'll not say it because you don't have to. A lot of that is older version of the Democratic Party where, it's we want our communities to feel livable and sustainable and also like they have been for the last 40 years, and the character of the neighborhood and those greedy land developers, et cetera. I have been heartened to see that young people get this. oftentimes, or are more likely to get this, that like you can't just sit there. You actually have to build, or there's nowhere for people to live. Like if we're gonna have neighbors, the neighbors gotta live somewhere.
Yeah, and I understand, on an emotional level, it has got to be it is an incredibly difficult thing. Just to look at Bozeman over the last 15 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you've lived in Bozeman for 15 years, you've watched your city double in population. You've watched housing prices more than triple. You have watched places where you could see the Bridgers and the Madisons where you're standing, and you no longer can, right? Because there might be a building there, and that's an emotionally powerful, tough thing to deal with. At the same time, it is also really emotionally difficult to watch homelessness double in every major city in this state, which is the case right now.
And when you look at what correlates tightly with homelessness, it's the cost of housing. Like that's the thing at the top of the list.
Truly. Hank, I was touring a community land trust in Bozeman, which is one of those models we could invest in to scale up affordable workforce housing. And, the way Nathan, who runs that land trust, summed it up for me, said, if there are 3 levers that we can pull to solve a housing crisis, it is supply, it is subsidy, and it's stability. And when it comes to supply, that means making sure we can build where we need to. When it comes to subsidy, that is models like the development block grant, like community land trusts. It means public investment, which the federal government, where I'm running to be a voice, has the scale to do. And then it's stability, which is the last thing we haven't talked about. That is protections for renters. That is protections for people in mobile home parks, 4,000 of whom are now owned by private equity firms just in Montana. 4,000 units of mobile home parks. Yeah. Those sort of protections also are part of the role of the government to make sure that we are providing common sense regulations, because it does not serve the public good for a few private equity firms to own thousands of units of mobile home parks when that is people's last affordable housing option.
Right. Like there's this balance because of course, if you like take the market approach, it's like, well, you could knock down the mobile homes and then instead of having 20 units on that lot, you could have 40 as an apartment building. But those apartments are going to have higher rents than the mobile homes had. You actually do have to think, what is the sort of housing of last resort? You can't just eliminate that in the quest for supply.
Yes. Let's also be clear. These private equity firms, they're not just clearing out the mobile home parks. What they're doing is, it's stories like I hear when I sit down with Debbie at King Arthur Mobile Home Park. I mean, their park is getting bought up. The same thing is happening here in Missoula. I mean, Mobile City, just 4 blocks from my house, just got bought up by a Texas private equity firm. What they're doing is they are seeing a profit opportunity because these people have nowhere to go. Because it's your last affordable housing option. And so what are they going to do when you come and buy it and you jack up the rent to double what it was 2 years ago? What I think they didn't expect is what people are doing, which is organizing, right? We have seen tenants unions form at mobile home parks across Missoula, across Bozeman. We've seen people fighting back. We saw the first rent strike in 50 years at a mobile home park in Bozeman earlier this year. And thank God, because that has always been the only way that we have to build power for ourselves as working people when we're facing massive amounts of capital and money that is trying to extract us for a little bit more profit.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you might think, okay, it's Montana, so you've got more Republicans than Democrats in this district, though it's a lot closer than you might otherwise think, and we'll get into that why. But you might think that the thing to do is to like go to the center of that and say like, okay, we need somebody like here in the middle being like, let's do the way that the things are done and do a little bit different. And that's how you attract the people who might be more suspicious of left-wing point of views. But it seems maybe more like the thing that is working, and I don't know, but is taking, instead of like, the traditional right-left axis, being like, okay, we have to be like left and populist.
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I talked about this when we spoke a month or two back. That whole right-left axis, I think, is a decade or two out of date at this point. I take it to be self-evident that Donald Trump did not get elected as president of the United States by being uniquely ideologically conservative. And it seems like everybody has missed this fundamental point. There's nothing conservative about $160 billion for immigration enforcement and trampling people's civil rights, right? There's nothing conservative about driving up the national debt far higher than we've seen in decades, all to build nothing, all for tax cuts for the rich and for corporations. The center right now is a lot of people, most people that I know, who are drowning in costs, who are really struggling just to afford their basic material needs. And I would offer that the government has 2 primary functions. First, it's to protect your constitutional freedoms. many of which are freedoms from the government, not all. And second, it's to make sure that people can meet their basic material needs when the market is not meeting them. And right now, the market is failing to meet a whole lot of needs when it comes to housing or healthcare or childcare or even retirement, right? If you're on a fixed income and Social Security, that has not kept up with the cost of living, especially in a place like Montana. And what's the government doing? Well, they're not doing a damn thing to make sure that Social Security doesn't become insolvent in 6 to 7 years, despite the fact that the solutions are clear. Making sure everybody carries their own weight, just like the rest of us.
Sam, before we get into talking about how the heck Montana has a competitive district, we're going to do a lightning round.
It's time for the lightning round.
Fun.
Billy Joel's We Didn't Start the Fire or Talking Heads Burning Down the House?
Burning down the house.
Most miles in one day under a full pack?
22. Took a wrong turn.
Worst spike camp you've ever set?
It was in Central Oregon. Had a bear climb up a tree above my tent.
Ooh, okay, fun. Favorite action movie?
Die Hard.
Who taught you to be a human?
Well, my mother.
Email or phone call?
Phone call.
One law you'd pass tomorrow?
Well, free healthcare for every working person in this country.
Whoa. The Montana issue that gets the least attention it deserves?
Maybe forest management.
Of course.
Yeah.
Kalispell or Missoula, which crowd is harder?
Missoula.
When was the last time you changed your mind about something?
Maybe yesterday, actually. I was touring a mill over in Deer Lodge.
We can end that lightning round there because I want to know more.
Let's dig in.
What happened in the mill in Deer Lodge?
It was actually pretty incredible walking around that place. It's one of 6 mills left in Montana. We had 30 in the early 2000s, right? 50 in the 90s. Walking around that mill, a lot of it was not news because I've done a lot of working with loggers in the last 8-9 years. But we had a discussion about what litigation looks like for trying to get a timber sale through on federal lands. And that's something I talked about, but we talked about it in greater depth and about, the fact that 90-some% of their sales are challenged and that most of them are in court for 5 to 6 years. And who does that impact the most? Small to mid-scale operations. If you're a big-sized operation, well, you can afford the capital.
Just sit
wait
there,
5-6 years. But that is a system that does not work for working people or for the small operations we need to responsibly harvest the timber that we need to do things like build houses.
And it's oftentimes everything kind of gets held up by the exact same procedure. Oftentimes it's just like, here's the lawsuits that we go through. It takes this long, which is not a good system.
And to be clear, I want to be real clear. What's happening right now is, well, the administration is completely circumventing protections.
Yeah.
That ain't the answer either. But the answer is making sure the system can actually work for, the 230 people whose livelihoods depend on that mill and its operations, and for all the people who live in the houses that they help, provide lumber for. That is the answer. It's a middle ground between where we were and where we are.
Yeah. So let's get into the weird situation that we are in Montana, where I think everybody thinks of Montana and they're like, well, that went like plus 11 to Trump. So that doesn't have a competitive district. I mean, to some extent, it's not like an easy one.
Nothing good is easy, right?
Indeed. But we do have this situation. How? Why? Why do we have like a really red district and a almost purple one?
Well, because we are one of the few states left with a nonpartisan redistricting commission. We are a state who tackled this problem of partisan gerrymandering by taking it out of the hands of partisan political actors. And when we redistricted last, this Western District, Montana's first, where we are, was created specifically to be a competitive district, to be a place where you could not just talk to your base and not care what happens in a general election. And that actually makes for better representatives.
That's wild. So it isn't just that they were going for like a certain geography. They're actually tasked with trying to create competitive districts.
Yep. One of their metrics in crafting this district was competitiveness.
Fascinating.
I mean, we got 2 tribal reservations in this district. We have 7 campuses. We have Missoula, Bozeman, Butte, Kalispell. We got 16 counties. And this is a district that a Democrat just won last election, actually. John Tester won Montana's first by just shy of 1% while losing statewide. And he did that in a year when I would offer the National Democratic Party was doing everything they possibly could to make it impossible for a Democrat to win.
It was very hard for John Tester specifically. Yeah. I had a very brief conversation with him and he did not seem sanguine about it. He's not been acting sanguine about it either. I don't know. Can you talk about that? Can you talk about Tester and his role? So we have this kind of strange tradition of having a fair number of Democrats in office in Montana. We had Steve Bullock, who was our governor for a while. What was his name? Pat Williams?
Yep. Last Democrat representing us in Congress.
Yeah, he was in there a long time. He's just recently passed. But it feels, and I'm looking at this from way on the outside, but it feels like Jon Tester wields some influence and is ruffling some feathers. Does that seem correct to you?
Yeah. Yes, on both sides. Yeah, he is still beloved by many in the party. He's divisive for some. He's a man who represented Montana for 18 years at a time when, since the very first election in 2006, when I think people forget he was the kind of lefty outsider that nobody thought could win in that first election. He's been doing it since the start, and that was a time when people thought that the Democratic Party was dead in Montana, and there have been a lot of second acts.
A lot of second acts. It's such an interesting thing. It does feel like we are at a moment where the sort of infrastructure is weak, or it's holding on really strong right now, even though it seems like the foundation has been shaken. And I think to some extent, like this is like a Hank Green take, but to some extent, because we've had this big media revolution and it's really changed the way people talk to each other, and it's changed our relationships to our sort of cultural infrastructure, which political parties are a big part of. And you were talking a little bit earlier about how you might actually create a kind of a different kind of Democratic Party. And I think a lot of people are thinking about that right now. Yeah. I know that you've been hanging out with AOC. You were at a rally here with her recently. Is that the sort of more populist side? How do you imagine that side of the Democratic Party?
The vision of the Democratic Party that I would like is one that is in many ways similar to what we had back when Pat Williams represented us in Congress. It is a party of working people, of union members, of young people, of people who still care about the Constitution. That is a winning coalition. And it's not what we have anymore, empirically speaking, right? In this last election, most people making under $100,000 did not vote for Democrats.
Yep.
About half of union members voted Republican. A lot of young people stayed home, or a lot of young men, including the folks I work with, swung to the right and started turning into the scariest kind of Republicans. And that is, I would offer, a direct result of the failures of the National Democratic Party to make people's lives better. People should be pissed if the Democratic Party had control at the federal level for 4 years, and if you are now making less than your parents were making at your age, or if you have fallen further behind. You should not have to know the intricacies of politics and policy making to know if your life got better. That's the metric you should be able to evaluate a party on.
That's the take feels coherent and like a good talk and take for you to say on your radio interviews for sure. What can we ask?
Let's get into the weeds.
What drove young people away from this? I guess we should say young men. In fact, we need to, because like young women didn't really get driven away from it.
Yeah, I'd say it's two things. It's a failure of representation, and it is a failure of urgency in policymaking. On the first front, again, look at who is actually in Congress right now. The average net worth of a congressperson, $3 to $4 million, depending on the day and how good the stock market's doing. That's not any better for the Democrats than the Republicans. The average age of a congressperson is 56 and 58 years old. You know who the older caucus in Congress is? The Democratic Party. How the hell did we let that happen?
I don't know, man. It seems so weird.
Again, people should be angry because we had this big conversation about representation over the last 10, 15 years on the left, that in large part was very healthy. But it seems to me like we forgot about the most fundamental kind of representation, which is economic representation. What is the one thing that is woven through all of our day-to-day experiences? How much money you got.
Yeah.
Right? And that is the thing that we've forgotten in the Democratic Party. And we do that because all of the party infrastructure, because our broken system of campaign finance is set up in a way that poor or working people, normal people, rarely are able to make it through.
They don't get heard they don't get heard. One of the things that is kind of remarkable about you is you're a young person and you're running for office at all. I think that most people would not see this as an option, would not know how to have that happen. It seems like a difficult thing to do unless you have a bunch of money in the bank. How do we get more people in general, but I also kind of mean young people, interested in trying to run for office?
I think it's two things. We lead by example, and we show people that this is something that we can do too. Generational change has never been something that they made easy, right? This happened in the 1960s. And the Democratic Party was desperately in need of change. And that change didn't come until, well, a whole lot of protesters were getting beat up outside the Democratic National Convention in Chicago by Daley's thugs. But the change came. And we got incredible legislation like the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act soon after that. What else we need to do is we need to actually support people who reflect our own lived experience and people who are, I mean, God forbid, less than 90 years old running for these offices because can't do it on our own. I mean, right now we have over 20,000 individual donors who help to make sure that we could get the message out and that I could pay my staff and pay for organizing.
That's crazy because it's not that big a district.
No, but many hands make lighter work. And like, it's not about me. Like I'm young, but I'm the tip of an iceberg and I have a staff of 4, but we have quite literally thousands of volunteers so far. We knocked thousands of doors, made many more thousands of phone calls. Like it took a lot more people than me doing a lot of work to help us get this far. And we have to seek out these candidates because still too often when a young person steps up and says they want to run for these offices, you hear from a lot of people telling you that it ain't your turn, that someone else already ran before. Somebody else has been in this seat. And you see that happening in primaries across the country. Shoot, you even saw it in this primary where a lot of people didn't think we could possibly win. And the last poll going into the primary had me at 13% and one of the other people at 35. Yeah, you don't change it by complaining. You change it by like going out and after work when we're all already busy, spending a couple hours knocking doors for somebody who actually inspires you and who gives you a compelling vision of how we can fix these things because we can, but we got to do it together.
Yeah. I mean, several times you've said things in this chat where I'm like, boy, the best cure for nostalgia is to know anything about history. It's just like, actually, it's been bad before.
Yeah, just because it rhymes doesn't mean it's good, right?
Yeah, no, but yeah, it's been bad before.
I mean, we're talking about history. I mean, all of the biggest moments of progress in this country have come out of moments just like this one.
I think you're right. Yeah, hit me with that theory.
Always gotten worse before it got better, and we didn't get the programs of the Great Society until we had the tumult in the streets of the 1960s. We didn't get the foundational programs that a lot of us depend on of the New Deal until we had people living hand to mouth in the 1930s. And a lot of the programs that we depend on today that they created then, like Medicaid and Medicare or even NPR or PBS, those are the programs they were able to pass out of all of that pain and chaos. And they're the things that are under attack and that we need to reimagine and expand to make sure that people can meet their basic needs. Right now, none of this is new. It's just our turn.
Can I ask, what are you like most worried about right now? Like not a thing that's currently happening, but a thing that might happen.
Well, frankly, it's the amount of money that's going to flood into this thing. I mean, Leading the Future Super PAC, they funneled in better part of $1 million for my opponent to get him through his primary. I expect many millions of dollars probably in the next few weeks to start pouring in to turn me into the biggest version of a monster that you could possibly imagine. And that's a scary thing.
Lobbyist and socialist stooge.
Yes. But I think we beat that by, actually talking to people a lot more because I think it is a lot more compelling for folks.
What has surprised you about campaigning?
Man, I have had so many moments that I would call disappointing but not surprising, right? They feel surprising in the moment, and then you realize, oh, this makes complete sense in the context of this system. I had a phone call early on in the first month of this campaign because, a lot of what happens in between the, 60-some events that we had the last couple of months of the primary, and between talking to as many people as possible, is you got to raise money just so you can get the message out there. And that's a lot harder if your friends can pitch in $50 or $100 on average instead of, $3,500 a piece. That's why you don't see working people making it to Congress very often. But yeah, I had a conversation that first month with somebody who said he's donated to a lot of Democratic candidates. And he said, I have a slide deck on how Democratic candidates should talk to working class people. And it takes about 30 to 40 minutes to get through, but I'll send it over. You should read it. And I said, yeah, I just want to tell you again, sir, I am a working person. Like I was jumping out of planes, making 60 to 100K for the last 4 years. Yeah, and a good year on the latter end of that. And he said, well, read through it and we'll talk again. And we didn't talk again. And I didn't read through it. But if you have got to create a 40-minute slide deck to tell a candidate how to talk to normal people, then you've lost the thread.
Yeah.
And the Democratic Party has lost the thread in so many instances.
Do you have the slide deck still? Can I see it?
No, I never even looked at the darn email. I don't got time for that because you know what? You got to work a little bit harder. I mean, it's honestly just like my mom told me when she was raising my sister and I on her own. She said, Sam, you got to be that much better because everyone else is already looking at you like there's something wrong here. And I don't want to let them think that. And that is what it is like running for federal office, for Congress. As a working person, you have to work that much harder. You have to make that many more phone calls. It is that much harder to get your message out. But that's the only way we change things.
God, I don't know how to solve the money problem, but it sure is a problem. It sure is. You know, Montana also has a tradition of this, of trying to figure out how to do money in politics better or to not have there be money in politics in the same ways. Steve Bullock ran hard on that. He actually ran for president on that platform, which no one will remember. But we're Montanans, so we remember. Right now, you got to treat it like the weather. You just got to live with that world. You got to figure out how to go 2 times faster or climb 2 times higher. Do you think about the actual policy solutions to that?
I do. I mean, we got to fight on the battlefield we got and have hard lines within it. So I'm not taking any dime from corporate PACs. I'm not taking a dime from APAC. But beyond those lines, I mean, the policy solutions, what do we do when we get there? We need to repeal Citizens United.
Yeah.
That's a big ask.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to imagine on a human level how you get through this process and your top priority is not making sure you never have to make another fundraising phone call again.
They're like, but that's what I'm good at. That's how I got here.
Yes. But again, I think it's all about systems, right? People who successfully navigate this system and get into the seat of a member of Congress or Senate, well, that system served most of them well, right? That system helped them to get there. And so their interest is not in changing that system in a major way. You've heard me say before, I think, is the people we elect are the policies we get. Like, we have to elect people whose interests are not served by keeping things the way they are. Campaign finance is a great example of that. Like, if you are not already wealthy or raised in networks of wealthy people, then a system of campaign finance where, well, one person can give unlimited money to outside groups doesn't serve you, does not serve me. It doesn't serve most of us, but it does serve a lot of the people who actually make it to the highest levels of power.
It's hard. It's a messy country, man.
But I want to get to the other policies beyond Citizens United, which that would require a constitutional amendment, of course. There are statutory ways that we can get at trying to ban corporate PAC spending altogether. At the state level, what do? We vote for I-194, this initiative that we have to change the way that we charter corporations and say that they can't spend money in our elections here in Montana. And we have to mount a concerted long-term public pressure campaign too and hold folks accountable if they're not willing to sign on to that constitutional amendment. We have to put pressure on the Supreme Court that's turned itself into a political body, allowing all this money to flood in. I'd offer an 18-year term limit on the Supreme Court as something we could do statutorily without a constitutional amendment. That would do a whole lot of good to get at this.
I read that your aunt is in Congress. Is this a cheat code? Because you gotta actually know some stuff about how Congress works. I feel like to run for Congress or to be in Congress, that's got to be a terrible orientation meeting. How has that been helpful?
Susie, she's one of my 7 aunts and uncles on my mom's side. It's a big Irish Catholic family. And the best piece of advice she ever gave me when I was thinking about this in November was don't do it because it's the most miserable job you could ever imagine.
Yeah.
But no, it is incredibly helpful to know kind of what I'm getting into because, I mean, the stakes for me deciding to run were having to quit my job. Can't be a federal employee and running for partisan political office. So I had to decide, is it worth, leaving the only shred of financial stability I got behind, leaving the only healthcare I got, the only retirement plan that I had to, take this big risk and take this big leap. And it was, helpful to know that this is actually doable.
Speaking of it being hard, I was Googling you this morning and there was a quote about you. It says, National Democrats are propping up lobbyist Sam Forstag because he's the perfect socialist stooge. What did you lobby? What was your lobbying days like?
Yeah. In between fire seasons for the last 8 years, I worked as an organizer and an advocate on policies that I care deeply about and that make people's lives better. So I worked for I helped put together the Montana Coalition to Solve Homelessness over the last 3 years and 22 to 24. We pulled together the Poverello right here in Missoula, 12 homeless shelters across the state, created the coalition, then created a policy platform, and went to Helena in 2023 and fought for things like getting mental health services in homeless shelters and fought for and successfully passed $5 million of state aid, first in state history, to shelters, because even in a Republican supermajority in 2023, folks are able to look up and have a little bit of compassion and say, if homelessness doubled or tripled, it's actually going to save us a lot of money to make sure people aren't freezing to death on the streets and that they're not ending up tied up in the carceral system or the state hospital and then getting dropped back off behind the Butte Rescue Mission without a plan when they get discharged.
You're also a perfect socialist stooge.
Thanks, Hank.
Look, guys, what I read in the paper when we first met, we were chatting, and I was like, I said, you and I aren't perfectly aligned in politics. We disagree about stuff, and you expressed surprise. You were like, "What do you mean?" And like, I don't know, but like, we are. And you kind of pushed me on it, and you were like, "Explain to me, like, what do you think we're separate on?" And I'm like, "Look, I think that I'm just sort of like a more liberal guy than you are. What I want is, to some extent, like, interesting ideas. I also want people to like be okay with disagreeing if they're aligned on most stuff, Yeah,
that's the only way this thing ever worked.
Yeah.
We are not supposed to agree on everything. I can't remember if you told me this or someone else, but if a politician tells you that you agree with them on everything, then they're probably lying. Because that's not how humans work, right? And that's not how democracy works either. Like, we don't have to agree on everything. Because if we did, as a precondition to engaging, well, we would never get any policies passed. We would never get anything done. That's not how people operate in the real world either, right? Like, if you're fighting a fire or framing a house, you don't get to the ground and pack up your parachute and ask everybody who they voted for last year. You start swinging a tool. And if you get downtime afterwards, you shoot the shit about it. These are basic lost arts that it seems like in Congress they've forgotten about. So we're building that into the campaign too. I've been holding a series of civil discourse interviews. I sit down with Republican legislators across the state and we say, Michelle and I, or Dan and I, we don't agree on everything, but we agreed that funding for public libraries is a worthwhile investment, or that Medicaid expansion to make sure kids don't get kicked off their health care was a worthwhile investment.
All right, now I think that we're going to do our second segment of the show. It's time for you asking me a question.
Ask Hank a question.
Hank, I feel like a lot of us have, somebody in our childhood who helped make sure that we know we could do big things and that we were capable of accomplishing things. And I'd love to know who was that for you?
I mean, it was my mom and it was my dad. It was to some extent my brother too. He was 3 years older. And so I could like see him doing things in the world. But one of the things that, like, having my own child that I think about is that line between when you're just sort of like approach the world as it exists and then when you actually want something from the world. So that's like happens pretty early. And then there's this moment where it's like, okay, could I like make the world like that? Instead of like waiting for somebody to bring me my apple juice, I can go get my apple juice. But also bigger than that, instead of like, oh, I wish there was a giant database. And this is a thing that my son is working on right now, which is adorable. A giant database of cars that have participated in this YouTube show that he likes. I just wish that existed. He and I are now building it together just cool. To like say like, you can make a thing, you can make things in the world, and you can take like a desire, and sometimes it's go to the fridge and get your apple juice, but sometimes it's like, this is a thing that's never existed. And if one person wants it and that person is you, then it's worth it. It's worth it to sort of like change the shape of the world. And I had that in a lot of different ways growing up. And it was because my parents both worked in nonprofits and in sustainability. My mom worked at the Science Center. My dad worked for the Nature Conservancy. I got to see like the people in their worlds making things different. I got to see scientists on the ground learning about gopher tortoises. I got to see the people at the Science Center turning an empty room into an exhibit. And that wasn't just like the world's structure, the way that it existed. It was like a person did this, which is really easy to not remember. And so things are made by people, and it is an easy thing to forget. You got to remember it both ways. You got to remember that like all of the things that we have are because of the work of people, and also that we have the ability to do that work.
Yeah. This doesn't happen on its own. And it's up to us to do it now, right? I mean, I think that's a big part of this too, is like, I mean, there's a lot of, especially on social media, I think it drives us towards complaining about everything that's wrong and griping about how terrible it is. And there's a lot that's wrong and terrible right now, but there's always been a lot that's wrong and terrible. Nothing ever got fixed by complaining, right? Like it gets fixed by actually like getting up and doing the really hard thing, whether that is, the real heroes who start their own podcasts, or or actually getting up and building something. Yeah, or getting up and knocking doors and talking to your neighbors and doing the hard thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Doing the hard thing. Speaking of all of this, I wanted to ask, so like my business, the podcast business.
I do love your podcast. I want to be clear.
Okay, great. Well, you don't have to, but thank you for coming on it anyway. I think a lot about attention, how people get attention. And this is like the thing in politics. How do you get the attention, not just of the wonky people on the Missoula politics subreddit,
mm-hmm.
but how do you get into people's minds? How do you set up that, start setting up that little constellation of who Sam Forstag is in people's minds so that they can take that to the ballot box?
I think, like a lot of this, the formula is surprisingly simple. Right now, it feels like we are just starved for authenticity. And what does that word actually mean? But people are starved for just not being BS'd.
Yeah.
Like, it feels like we are being BS'd by almost all of our political leaders, who will say all these message-tested words that when you string them together, they make a sentence that technically makes sense, but doesn't actually convey anything, right? And doesn't actually offer a solution for how do I change the fact that half of my friends cannot conceive of owning a home. So I think it's just that. It's be willing to pay the price of not making everybody happy with every sentence you say, but to actually just speak your truth and talk about your experience and talk about the actual experience of our neighbors who are really being screwed a lot of the time. And the fact that we should be angry about that, but we don't have to just be angry. We can do something about it.
I mean, the big problem is that people think about politics in a very national frame now. And so the people who nationally can get a lot of attention, that's a national thing. And that's a totally different game than trying to get the attention of just, Western Montana. Is there even a way to do that? Just getting the attention of this slice of people? Because who's watching the local news? Our media diets are so national now.
A lot of Montana's problems are the country's problems, right? That's actually where we started this conversation. We are not unique in our housing crisis.
Yeah.
We are unique in the scale and the speed of it. But what's happening here is what's happening in the rest of the country. It is just worse than anywhere else you will go on a state basis. And so let's tell those stories. The way I've been doing that is, going to sit down with people like Debbie at King Arthur or with Kathy at a park here in Missoula. Let them talk. Because I'm not the best person to talk about what it's like to watch your lot rent double in 2 or 5 years. They are. And that's actually a lot more authentic. And that's actually not something you got to make up. And it's the same when it comes to healthcare or forest management, too. I mean, it is not just our problem when we have increasing numbers of megafires. And when in the last 8 years of firefighting, I've ended up on 5 fires that are the biggest of that state's history, sometimes jumping over each other. That's the whole country's problem. And they wake up to that every 3 years when it gets smoky in New York City. So let's talk about that, and let's talk about the fact that we know how to fix it. And oftentimes the people who have the best ideas for how to fix those problems, like forest management, are the people on the ground making $15 an hour as a GS4. Because it's pretty clear to even a firefighter who might have studied philosophy, God forbid, that the worst way to fight a fire is when it's already burning. And the better way to fight a fire is to actively invest in forest management and to do fire mitigation work, the kind of fire mitigation that decreased by 63% in Montana over the last year when they made all those cuts. Because there's nothing more expensive than waiting until a fire is burning into a subdivision and then calling in large air tankers of retardant that cost $7,000 or $8,000 a pop. What's a lot less expensive and a lot more effective is paying somebody to be on a fuels crew and to do what AI can't do, to stomp around the woods with a chainsaw and make sure that we have thinning in the front country and that our communities are safe when the fire does happen.
Yeah, and that can also be more year-round work, and you aren't just on call. It's not just suddenly here you go.
Oh my God, I got a lot of digressions, but a story I've been telling. We had the Windy Rock fire last year in Helmville, a couple hours east of here. That fire was 2,000 acres, not in the most populated neck of the woods, and it cost the state $56 million. And my napkin math is that $56 million could pay 2,000 people, $20 an hour, 365 days a year to stomp around the woods with a chainsaw and actually do the active forest management that we need to actually be introducing fire on the landscape, which we need and which is natural, and to do it when it's safe, which is not in July and August. That would keep so much more money in our communities by creating good paying jobs. But instead, what we do is we wait until it's a crisis. We call in those air resources. We spend millions more, and all that money goes into the pockets of people like Tim Sheehy, who just happens to own a aerial firefighting contracting company that only makes its money off of our taxpayer dollars that go to his contracts.
Got to put in a little dig on Tim Sheehy, I guess.
Well, yeah, we got a corporate executive cosplaying as a firefighter. I mean, I can't let that go.
Amazing. Obviously, you're talking to lots of people who disagree with you. I mean, ideally, you are anyway. And you still want those votes and you still want to represent them. How do you think about that?
Like I said earlier, we don't have to agree on everything. That was never supposed to be how this worked. And that I would rather somebody knows where we might disagree and also knows that I'm not BSing them than try to obscure it with vague language. Mm-hmm. And I think that that is something very few people running for federal office do nowadays. So I engage with them and say, I think we do agree on these basic notions that you should be able to work one good job and afford a roof over your head and real healthcare that actually gets you care when you need it instead of, if you're like me, I tear my calf in a wildfire 3 years ago and then I limp off 3 days later and then I go to the orthopedist in town and I find out, well, that healthcare I've been paying for is out of network, so I still pay out of pocket. Mm-hmm. And you should be able to afford childcare and a good retirement. It seems that the vast majority of people agree with that sentiment.
I think that is the case. What do you find yourself disagreeing on? And what's an example of not bullshitting?
I think it's a lot of the issues that you will see when I go to the state legislature. If you watch Congress, they spend 2/3 of their time talking about culture wars or social issues. We might not agree on all of those things. I feel very strongly that that first function of government that I mentioned earlier, to protect your basic constitutional freedoms, a lot of the time that means making sure government is not imposing a worldview on you. Government, their job should not be deciding, government's not here to decide where you pee. Government's here to make sure that you can actually fulfill your basic needs. And it seems like right now, what we have is a lot of the people in power, they spend most of their time singing and dancing about these issues so that you don't notice that while they're singing and dancing over here, they're picking all of our pockets. They're cutting the top income tax bracket year after year after year. They're cutting the corporate tax rate, and we're all poorer, and they're all still trying to make us hate each other.
The thing about corruption specifically, so of course, lowering the top income tax bracket, that's not corruption. It's a law, and they passed it, and they did that the normal way. But there is some corruption going on now. And I think that it's important to say that the reason why corruption is bad is because it's stealing, it's theft, it's stealing from people, it's stealing from everybody. Oftentimes these white collar crimes, they just sort of oh, well, if you didn't have a knife when you did it, I guess it just sort of goes into another category. But I don't hear enough people talking about why corruption is bad, which is silly. There's a lot of real strong reasons why corruption is bad, why the president shouldn't own a cryptocurrency that you can buy. And then if you do it enough, maybe you get a pardon. That's not how things should work. It's stealing. It's stealing from everybody.
Yeah. Yeah. And it leaves all of us poorer for it in so many ways, right? State of scarcity where they tell us we can't afford basic things like healthcare or childcare, but we can't afford to, shovel more money into Raytheon's coffers and spend $40 billion raining chaos and corruption overseas, or chaos and cruelty. I mean, it leaves us poor morally as well. We are in a worse place because the people in power have conflicts of interest that they're using to govern and decide how we use our resources.
And it makes it hard to believe in the country, which I think a lot of people have ended up with that problem now, where we're having a hard time believing in the thing. It almost feels like the causality was a little reverse. First we lost faith. And then we were and so I guess this is okay. So I guess this is what politicians are like. Donald Trump is an authentic politician, you can tell, because of how he's a con man. And sorry to any Trump
the bar was lowered so much, right?
Yeah, but it was also lowered when I was a kid. I have such a hard time with the fact that the Democratic Party just sort of is still down with Bill Clinton. I still believed in things when he just lied to my face on TV.
Yeah.
And about a big, important thing. He didn't think he was going to get caught. And I know that that's not the same thing, but every one of those is a little bit of your faith taken away.
Yeah. I mean, what's that Faulkner line? Jesus was not crucified on the cross. He was crucified by the minute ticking of little clocks.
Look at you with your philosophy degree.
Is that literature? Who knows? But no, I think that really what happened is we were being BS'd by both parties. One party was going to make our life worse a little bit slower, and one was going to make it worse faster. And then one person came in. And in this last election, what we had is one party in the presidential election who was telling all of us that the economy is better than we think it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I can think of no better articulation of a disconnect, let alone BSing people, than that. And then you had the other guy saying that the system's broken. He was telling everybody one piece of truth, that the system is broken, and then lying about everything that they're going to do to fix it. And the system is broken, right? If you're that person showing up to the only orthopedist in town and then your healthcare doesn't actually get you care, that's a broken healthcare system. If you are living in a housing market where the cost of housing is doubled, or you go to Bozeman, it's tripled, where you can't conceive of ever owning a home in the place you were born and raised, that's a broken system of housing. The same goes for childcare. Frankly, the way that we manage our forests, a lot of that is broken as well. And there are solutions to all these things. None of these are too complex for us to solve or beyond our grasp. There's a lack of political will, because there's only been political will for decades now behind the things that can generate a profit for somebody who can then donate to a political campaign. How do we fix that? Well, we got to start electing people who know what it's like to be on the wrong side of those systems. Because if you bet your tail, if I know what it's like for my belly to be full as a kid, thanks to food stamps, I'm going to fight with a little bit more urgency to make sure that we don't curtail food stamp or SNAP benefits like we did last year for a lot of furloughed government employees included. You bet your tail, if I know what it's like to rely on the public library so I have a safe place to go from 3 to 7 o'clock after school when my mom's finishing her shift, that I'm going to fight like hell to make sure we don't cut funding for our public libraries. Far too few of the people in Congress know what that's like. And so they've allowed us to systematically disinvest from these things. And now you look up and we're in a country where half of us are making less than our parents, and we should be really angry about that. And we should move past the anger and do something about it.
So you mentioned that this district has several Indian reservations. Is it 2, 3?
We have 2. We have Blackfeet Nation.
Yeah.
And then we have the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes.
Yeah. So that's, a uniquely American situation where we have these nations inside of our nation.
We contain multitudes. Yeah.
Yeah. How do you think about representing the native population of Montana?
It is a unique thing, right? That means we have a lot of folks in this district in Montana who I hope to earn as constituents, but also they're sovereign nations. Mm-hmm. So that means they're not just constituents, they're partners and equal partners, and partners who we have serious treaty obligations, many of which we have failed to adhere to make sure that we are actually providing for health and safety and welfare. The way I think about that is, talking to who the tribal leaders are and their elected leaders, folks like Tyson and Thetis, up in Blackfeet Nation, folks like Shelley and Shane on CSKT, to actually listen to them in terms of what their needs are and what's not being met. Mm-hmm. Right now, again, a lot of those needs are not completely unique. We need to increase investment in IHS, the Indian Health Service. You should not have to drive to leave the reservation and come down to Missoula if you want to get complex care. If you're up in Glacier County, they were telling me that they are 3 years into litigation to get IHS to reimburse the county for millions of dollars of care that they are supposed to pay for. And so the county ends up just having to pay for it. And that means that they can't afford other things like ambulance services. Mm-hmm. That is precisely what our congressperson should be here for. They can pick up the phone, call your congressperson. Hopefully me, when we win this thing, because Inky ain't doing it, can call IHS and say, knock it off and reimburse them for those healthcare expenses, because that is your obligation legally under our treaties that we've signed. Yeah.
This makes me think of, I had this conversation with an astronaut, Reed Weissman, an idea that he hit me with I had not heard of. That is, I've been thinking about a lot, is what he called active followership, or what is called active followership, where in times leaders have to be leaders. And then there's a moment, and I imagine this can also be this way, like when you're smoke jumping, there's a moment when like the leader has to listen to another person who has a different kind of expertise. And suddenly the leader becomes an active follower. And then like these roles are constantly switching.
Yeah.
And when you're dealing with nations within nations, when you're dealing with people who have great ideas, even though they're not at the top of the food chain, it seems like you're kind of talking about that thing.
Yeah, and we do the same thing in smoke jumping. The jumper in charge on any given fire is just the person who happens to be the first on the plane, the person who happens to be the highest on the list, the last one to get back from the last fire. And it doesn't matter if you're a 20-year jumper or a first-year rookie. If you're the first one out that door, you get to the ground, you're the JIC, you're the one who is ordering resources, saying how much paracargo you need, and making some major strategic decisions. And that's a skill set in its own, right? Is to be ready and willing to step up and do the extra work it's going to take to carry out logistics, but also to just swing a tool.
Wow.
And to put your head down and work like hell if that's where you can be most useful. And yeah, we got so many people at the highest levels of power who, well, I think a lot of how we got here is they were putting their ego in front of the good of the whole, in front of the public good. And yeah, we've got to be able to put our ego aside, even if it means listen to a rookie telling us what we need to do to fix this thing.
Yeah, it could be hard as a person who has had rookies school me.
The rookie still has to wake up early and make us all coffee regardless. And I think that's important, among other duties.
It sounds like there's a lot of Montana to keep inside of your mind, but you sound like you won the primary, so let's just win the whole thing.
We can do that.
Sam, I have one last question for you. If there's anything you've learned from this work that you wish everyone on Earth knew, what would it be?
I mean, it sounds trite, but it's that we have so much in common. Truly, when I'm going up to Blackfeet Nation or when I'm going to Kalispell or down to Dillon, like most of our problems are the same right now. Most people in this state really are struggling to afford a roof over our head, whether that's your rent or your mortgage. And most people, when you actually look them in the eyes and you're not just looking through a screen, I mean, this seems like a pretty good facsimile of it for you and me, Hank. They really are trying to bring the good in the best way that they know how and in the way that they conceive of it. And they want to help their neighbors. And I think social media really skews that, and it turns us into our worst selves. And it makes it so much easier to act heartlessly. I think that the most beautiful part of the campaign is, well, I'm being forced to go drive all across 147,000 square miles and look as many people in the eyes as possible. And it really is restoring my faith in humanity.
Sorry that the state's so big, but, somebody's got to put the miles on the car.
Big and beautiful, though.
Sam, thank you for coming by the podcast studio in your own home and also trying to figure out a way to do this thing. It sounds miserable.
Let's do it again, brother. It's the most exhausting and exciting thing that I've ever done. And it's inspiring. We can do this. If anyone's interested to find more, go to samformontana.com. It's all spelled out. You can find out more about my policies. They're excruciatingly detailed on that website. You can sign up to volunteer. That's how we win this thing. I need all the help I can get.
He didn't say it, but you can also give him money.
Yes, and I need that too. That's how we get the word out. samformontana.com.
Thanks to all the humans who helped make this episode. Morgan Levy is the show's supervising producer, and Greg Rippin is our engineer. Peyton Mitchell manages our social media, Andrew Huang composed the music, and James Barnard designed the artwork. You can, and should, follow us wherever you listen to podcasts.
Let's do it one more time.
Humans.